There are few things as important as sleep. It is the foundation of just about everything we do. And in this episode, I had the privilege of sitting down with Dr. Kirk Parsley, who has studied sleep for the last 15 years. And it is absolutely mind-blowing to find out how even one night of sleep deprivation can completely affect your next day and the follow-up days to that. I think you're going to really enjoy this episode, and I know you're going to take your sleep more serious after you listen to it.
This is the No Excuse to Miss podcast.
Welcome to the No Excuse to Miss podcast. I'm your host, Scott Volkortson. This week, we are going to cover something that affects every single one of us, sleep. And there's nobody better to discuss this topic with than Dr. Kirk Parsley. He is a former Navy SEAL, a member of the American Academy of Sleep. He consults for multiple corporations as well as professional athletes and teams. He lectures worldwide on sleep, wellness, and hormonal optimization. And he is the author of Sleep to Win. Welcome to the show, Dr. Parsley. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on, man. I always appreciate the opportunity to stand on the soapbox and blather.
Well, I appreciate you coming on. And this is one I wanted to do for a while because when I first heard you on a podcast, probably a year or two ago, I was one of those guys that always, I'll sleep when I'm dead type guy.
Yeah.
Go to bed at 2, wake up at 6. And after I started listening to you talk and then I read your book, Sleep to Win, I'm like, I got to make some significant changes because it's obviously not healthy. So I guess let's start. How did you get into, or if you want to give us a little bit of a background and then how you got into the focus of sleep?
Yeah. So I'll give you the full benefit story. So I grew up out here. I'm in Austin now. I grew up out in Katy, Texas, and I was into cars and girls and sports and martial arts and stuff like that. I didn't care about school. And I actually dropped out of high school. I went to high school for 4 years, but then I was only a sophomore by credits at the end of 4 years. So I dropped out of high school, joined the Navy because I'd recently heard about this special forces group called the SEALs, well before they had any kind of celebrity status. There was a documentary show, kind of like 60 Minutes. It's called 48 Hours. I don't know if you remember back then, but it was the late 80s or mid to late 80s, I guess. And they had covered this BUDS class, this SEAL training class, and they kept saying, "Oh, it's the toughest training in the world, toughest training in the world." I'm like, well, I want to do the toughest training in the world, so I'm going to go do the SEAL thing. Honestly, I didn't really know what a SEAL was. I just knew that they had the toughest training in the world, so I wanted to go do that. So I joined, and obviously I made it through. I was successful, and spent 6 years in the SEAL teams, did 3 deployments. Fell in love with a girl, got out, got married, started going to college, thinking I was going to be a physical therapist, which seemed lofty for me, given that I still didn't have a high school diploma. But you need about 2,000 volunteer hours to even apply to PT school. So I started volunteering at San Diego Sports Medicine Center, and that quickly turned into a job. And then, within about 6 months, I decided I didn't want to be a PT, that was a little too limited for me. But it was a total healthcare mecca. We had every kind of healthcare provider you could imagine. And, I got to be pretty good friends with several of the doctors, because I'd been in the military, for about 7 years all up at that time. And this was like a year later, so 8 years later. So I was only about 5 or 6 years younger than the doctors that were there, the new doctors. And so I became pretty good friends with them, and they talked me into becoming a doctor, kind of guilted me into trying. And then when, the pre-internet, you had to go down to the bookstore and get your Kaplan's review and figure out what schools you were competitive for once you took the MCAT and had your GPA and all of that. And I started looking through there, and that's when I learned that the military had their own medical school. And I had no desire to go back in the military. That was a closed chapter in my life as far as I was concerned. But I was already married, and I already had a kid, and, I'd had another kid on the way. So I I figured, if they'll pay me to go to medical school and I can support my family while I go to medical school, then I can give them the time, right? Because that's the way the military works. They'll train you to do anything, but then you have to do it for a certain amount of time to make it worth their while. So you have to be a doctor for 8 years in the military after they train you. So I thought, yeah, I'll do that. Yeah, I figured I would get back to the SEAL teams and be able to get back to the community that, really saved my life. I would have had a completely different world if I hadn't joined the military and gone to the SEAL teams. So I did get back to the SEAL teams, and I was planning on being an orthopedic surgeon. And of course, I had that 6 years of college and working at San Diego Sports Medicine Center, and I had really well steeped in orthopedics and sports medicine. And I figured that's what I would do when I went to the SEAL teams. And then, when I got to the SEAL teams, they had just gotten the funding to build their first sports medicine facility. And I was just the lucky guy who was there at that time. So they put me in charge of building that out, So I was supervising the physical build out of the space, but as well as, hiring the right people to fill it. And we had, we hired our first nutritionist and our first strength and conditioning coach and our first, athletic trainer and sport exercise physiologist and PTs and PT assistants. And, we brought acupuncture rounds through, we brought pain rounds through, we brought ortho rounds through. And then I was the dumbest guy around at that point because we had all these great experts. We were hiring people from, the Olympic Training Center and from professional sports teams. And we were getting creme de la creme. And so when you're the dumbest guy around in the military, that means you need to be in charge. So they put me in charge of just supervising everybody, whatever that meant. Okay, well, you manage the clinic. But I really didn't have a job, right? Because all these guys, everything that clinic did, I was not the expert in. There were people there who knew more than I did about everything. So it was sort of a management role, but my office was in the clinic. And the SEALs would do their rehab or whatever, and they would come by my office and close the door behind them and say, hey, man, let me tell you what's really going on. Because SEALs are a lot like professional athletes in that the worst thing that they can possibly imagine is being put on the bench, right? Taking them out of their platoon, taking them away from their boys and putting them off to the side literally is the worst thing you can do to them. They would give up pay. They would take a severe injury over that. They would, anything like that is the worst thing you can do. And so, in general, they don't really trust healthcare providers because healthcare providers are the guy that can put them on the bench. And so when they go see their doctors for their routine exams, they just say, everything's great. I got no problems whatsoever. I'm fine. But because I was a SEAL, and I'd been a SEAL recently enough to where there were still a lot of people around that I'd been a SEAL with, and I had a good reputation and people trusted me. They would come in and say, hey, let me tell you what's really going on. And they would proceed to say, I just feel really kind of uneasy and anxious. My memory's horrible. My concentration's horrible. I can't pay attention during a briefing. I have to leave my house 5 times every morning because I get in my car and I start to leave and I realize I forgot my wallet, and I go back in, I get my wallet, and I get in my car and I pull out and I realize I forgot my badge, and I go back in and I do. And, 5 times, it takes 5 events before I actually get in my car and I'm driving. And then half the time I'll pass my exit, even though I've been driving that same, course for 20 years. And, I'm snappy with my kids. I'm snappy with my wife. I cry in Hallmark commercials. My sex drive's low. My body composition shifting. I'm getting fatter. I'm getting weaker. I'm losing muscle, but I'm training harder. And I'm, working with the nutritionist. I'm working with the trainer. I'm doing everything right. I'm journaling. I'm tracking all my workouts. I'm doing everything right. And basically they just weren't performing well and they didn't feel good. And I'm a Western trained medical physician, right? So I went to probably the most traditional medical school you could go to, probably the most conservative medical school you could go to would be the military's medical school. And so I knew how I knew the American Medical Association's view on, how to recognize and diagnose a disease and how to treat it. But none of these guys had a disease, right? They just weren't performing the way they wanted to perform, and they felt like they should be doing better. And of course, their standards, you couldn't apply that standard to the rest of the world, right? Because if I were to say, they're worried about their motivation or their energy or their performance, and you compare them to the average American. Well, they're way better than those people, right? Like they're performing way better. They're way faster. They're way stronger. They're way more capable. But
and I would assume like their body composition compared to the average,
right,
30-year-old male is going to be much better. I mean,
yeah, like a SEAL thinks he's fat at 10% body fat.
Yeah.
So if he doesn't have 6-pack abs, he's fat, right? And he's like, oh, look at how fat I am. And so, I didn't have a clue, to be honest. I was like, I don't know. I don't have any idea. But this was 2009. So they'd been in combat for 8 years. So I thought, well, maybe it's one of those things they talked about in all the past wars, right? They've called it combat fatigue. They've called it shell shock. They've called it, whatever. Like you've heard all those terms from Vietnam and the world wars and all that stuff. So I thought, maybe it's something like that. I don't know. Like, let me just collect all the data I can. So I was sending them to the hospital to pull like every lab marker I could possibly think of that might be associated with their performance. And I was testing like all of their hormones, and I was testing all their inflammatory markers and doing chem panels and micronutrients and CBCs and anything I could think of. And it was about 98 different serum markers that they were testing. The military caught on to that after about a year. They didn't really like that because I guess it was costing like $1,500 per lab or something. So what do I know? I don't care. So I'd say over the course of my 4 years, or what was it, from 2009 to 2013, I left in January 13. So during that time, probably 400 guys came in my office and told me almost the identical story, right? I 10 patients into it, I could have saved time and told them their story for them. But I'd listen, and 3 or 4 months into it, one guy said something to me about that he took Ambien when he went to sleep. He took Ambien every night. And I remember this light bulb going off in my head and going, that seems familiar. Like it seems like a lot of people have said that. And I put a little note in the margin to look it up. So after he left, I went back through all my files, and every single person who had been in my office was taking Ambien. And I thought, well, maybe that's a side effect of Ambien. Now, again, being a Western trained medical physician, I didn't know anything about sleep because I had never been taught anything about sleep. And this was before sleep was in the media at all. No one was talking about sleep. You could find as far as the lay audience books, you could find like 2 or 3 books on sleep.
If anything, they were probably treating it like it's a badge of honor not to have to sleep.
Right. Right. Well, and that's the other thing is when you think about the population that I'm dealing with, I probably chose the worst 2 professions for sleep, right? A SEAL and a doctor. Neither one of those professions think that sleep's that important. In SEAL training, we go a full week without sleep. So how, and when you're training and, doing missions, like you go 2 or 3 days without sleep all the time, like right before you go do the training mission or the op or whatever you're doing. So it was really common, that sleep was kind of like this weakness. And if you're really hard and really motivated, you just push through it. And, these guys were coming back and they were taking Ambien. And at that time, again, like I didn't know anything about sleep. So I didn't really know what happened when you slept. I just knew that you sleep, right? And you feel better when you get up. So there's probably some sort of replenishment, but I didn't really know what. And neither would any other doctor, right? Unless they had been, specifically studied sleep medicine. And so I started trying to look at the side effects of Ambien. I remembered learning in pharmacology class like how Ambien worked. I knew that it was a GABA analog, which means that it acts like the neuropeptide GABA. But exactly what GABA did, I wasn't like 100% sure, like how that was affecting sleep. So I didn't really know, what could be going on. So it forced me to learn a lot about sleep really quickly, because you have to know a lot about sleep to understand what the side effects could be. And, and the way the pharmaceutical industry works is like the last couple of years have kind of shown us it's a highly political thing, and money plays a big part in it. And when companies apply for FDA approval, they provide the FDA with the research that they did on themselves. And they get to cherry pick it, and they get to say, well, this is the really important stuff, and I'm not going to give you this stuff because it's not really important. Well, right around that time, they were starting to get successfully sued. Both the manufacturers of Ambien and Lunesta have been sued because they cause a dissociation. When you take that drug, your neocortex, that part that you think of when you think of a human brain, that squiggly, wrinkly thing that we picture, that sits on a brain stem, right? On the lizard brain, as a lot of people call it. And what Ambien really does is dissociate those two. And we can talk about why that is later on if you want to. But in that dissociation, it takes the real you out of it, and you're operating off your lizard brain. And what does your lizard brain want to do is survive. So it's into reproduction, and it's into eating, and it's into exhilaration, thrill seeking, because novel behavior propagates the species. Novel behavior allows you to try new foods and engage in more reproductive activities and so forth. And so it's really primal sort of behavior. And so these people were taking Ambien, and they were becoming completely dissociated, and they would get in a car and they'd drive to the casinos in Vegas, and they'd gamble away their life savings, or they'd go pick up prostitutes, or they'd go down to their kitchen and eat all of their kids, donuts and cupcakes and, cereal and sweets and all that other stuff. And then wake up the next day and have zero recollection of it. Zero, nothing in their mind about it. And so turns out that the pharmaceutical industry knew that happened, but they didn't offer that bit of information.
Shocking.
So they got sued for it. Then it starts coming out. Okay, well, let's see what it actually does. So once I learned a lot about sleep, and the benefit for me was that I was working, I mean, the SEALs had celebrity status at that point, right? They had already killed bin Laden. They'd been touted by Rumsfeld, and they were they were the cat's ass. The SEALs could do no wrong. And so I could call up anybody and say, hey, man, I've read your book, or I listened to your TED talk, or, I saw your lecture, and I'm the doctor for the West Coast SEAL teams. Could I ask you some questions? Could I consult with you on my guys with the problems that they're having? And everybody was, very helpful. And not a single person turned me down. And not a single person I would say was anything less than enthusiastic about it. So I got to learn a lot really quickly. And once I started learning about the architecture of sleep and what's actually going on while you sleep, then I thought, well, shit, this could literally explain every single symptom the guys are complaining to me about. Now, I wasn't naive enough to think it would. I didn't think, I'll get everybody to sleep and 100% of everything will go away. But I knew it was going to be a big swath, right? It was going to be a big player. So I started working with the SEALs individually, the guys who'd come to see me. And, I worked with them to get off of their sleep drugs. And, I couldn't just take their sleep drugs away. I had to give them something, right? Because they were taking sleep drugs because they couldn't sleep, obviously.
Yeah.
Right. So I couldn't just pull that away and say, suck it up. So I had to come up with something to give them. And really, to the credit of the SEALs I was working with, they helped me. I mean, these guys helped me figure out the right amounts of what supplements, and that was kind of at the beginning of the vitamin D3 craze. And I knew that vitamin D3 was affected sleep. And so I started giving everybody vitamin D3, thought I was a genius. I was going to solve everything. And of course, that was of marginal importance, but it did improve. Then I found out, magnesium is required for every vitamin D3 reaction. So let's skip that. And so slowly we just added ingredients, and we had this stack of 7 different supplements that they were taking. And this was pre-Amazon. So they were having to go around to different, health food stores in San Diego, and they could buy this, this product here and that product there. We were figuring out which brands were good and what was the right amount. But the problem, of course, is that some came in 90-day supplies, some came in 30-day supplies, some were powders, some were liquid, some were capsules, and it was a pain in the ass. And they really harangued me into making a product. It was the only reason I have that sleep supplement was, to get them off my back. But anyway, so I got them off of their sleep drugs. Got them to value sleep, taught them the importance of sleep, taught them how I thought that was impacting them. And they were great I mean, they were the ideal patients because they were super motivated to get better. And they worked like right next door to me. I mean, so they walked by my office every day and they would come in and they would tell me like, hey, this is what happened. I did this last night. That happened. They would keep journals. They were constantly monitoring their workouts and their body comp and everything. Like they were the best sort of, subjects I could have to help figure this out. And we had amazing results. I mean, guys' testosterone levels were tripling. The estradiol levels were, decreasing by 80, 90%. Their sex hormone binding globulin was decreasing. Their inflammation was decreasing. Their oxidation was decreasing. Everything anabolic was going up. Everything catabolic was going down. They were getting the best PR, like they were getting their PRs in their, 30s and 40s of like their best lifts, their best runs, their best, swim times, whatever. Like, and it was because their whole damn career, they hadn't really been valuing sleep. And so then I took it to the leadership and tried to say, hey man, like I think this is sort of an epidemic in our community. And I had the luxury of being able to go through the medical records, and I estimated that, and lots of people agreed with me. But I estimated that about 85% of the community was taking sleep drugs. And I said, I think this is the problem. I think this is causing a lot of our issues. And of course, it's super expensive to create a seal. I mean, it's really expensive to create a seal. It's a lot of money in a lot of years. And so losing a seal is a big deal, especially at the age these guys are coming in, like mid 30s to early 40s. Like these are these are the elders of the SEAL teams. These are the guys who actually know what the hell they're doing and can teach the younger guys and can lead and coordinate. And so I took it to the leadership and said, hey, I think this is an epidemic and we need to do something about it. And I'm not exaggerating with you when I say that I got laughed out of offices. Like they thought it was the dumbest thing they'd ever heard in their life and thought I was some kind of quack. And of course, now I think the average American would know all of that, Yeah. And that's only a short period of time. It's like 12 years, 13 years that transition's happened. And now like the average person knows all of that now. And so we did these pre and post deployments. So when a SEAL team was going to deploy, we would take the entire team and their families out to a resort for a long weekend. And, we'd bring in like all the resources of the things that, of the support for them and their families. And we would give lectures and we'd give workshops and we'd prepare the family for, hey, your husband's going to be gone for, whatever, 6 to 9 months. And these are the typical pitfalls and the things you're going to run into. And here's some resources to help you get through it. Here's how you can do your self-care. Here's groups you can join, whatever. And we would bring in guest lecturers, right? Because, a little bit of celebrity status, kind of made people feel like they were getting a higher quality thing, and they're more motivated to pay attention. They felt more valued. And so we were bringing in good name guys. We're bringing in Rob Wolf and John Wellborn. I know he was just on your podcast. We bring him in for strength and conditioning, talking about that. We bring in Dave Grossman, to talk about the psychology of killing and, all these types of things. But, of course, the Navy had me for free. So I got put in all these lectures because, they didn't have to pay me a dime. And I was useful for that setup. But it allowed me to meet all of these guys who were on the lecture circuit, and they were impressed. It was novel to them too. I mean, even they weren't thinking. And Rob Wolf was probably the one thinking the most about sleep of any of them. But we just all got each other's ears, and they started bringing me on their podcast and recommending me for other podcasts. And then when they were doing symposiums, lectures, health events, they would recommend me as a speaker. And I ended up going on the lecture circuit and podcast circuit and becoming this sought after sleep expert, although it was nothing I sought. It was just the solution my community needed. And then, there's some nuances as to like what ultimately ended up helping them the most. Sleep was the most important, but there were some other issues that I discovered along the way that, that we worked on then too. And I still treat, probably 100 SEALs at any given time, like retired guys who come see me when they get out. And that's sort of my philanthropic work. I continue to help them, with anything sort of performance based. And that's what my private consulting is now. I do private consulting for people who aren't really sick, but just want to perform better, So it's usually the 45 to 55-year-old man who traded his health for wealth for 30 years, sold his company for $100 million. And now he doesn't care about money, but he really wants to be in great shape again. And he wants to do it all in a year. That's how I got to where I am today. I know that was super long-winded, but
that was awesome.
Yeah.
No, and I see it, a lot of times, and I was guilty of this myself, where you'd always look for the latest supplement, all these little other hacks, other than people would say, start with your sleep and then take everything from there. But it almost seems too simple. But as I was like reading through your book, even I think you said like a couple hours of sleep deprivation a night, basically your cognitive function is almost like that of somebody that's legally drunk.
Right. Or illegally drunk, right?
Or illegal, yes.
I've never known how to phrase that, but
yeah, I guess, I've never thought about that.
Past the legal blood alcohol level. So that research has been done a lot because, the difficulty in my job with regard to the sleep coaching, which, most of what I do or when I'm working with clients, most of what I do with sleep is just coaching, right? There are some pharmaceutical interventions and some nutritional, supplements and so forth that we can use, but it's a lot of behavioral modification. And if you think about it, it's probably the worst thing to try to coach people in, because if I coach you perfectly and you do everything perfectly and respond perfectly, you won't have any recollection of sleeping. Right. You'll go to sleep and you'll wake up the next day and be like, I don't remember anything. Right. And that's what I'm selling you. Hey, this part, you don't remember anything? Perfect. Like that's great. It sounds like a snake oil salesman, right? But I used to teach that when I first started my lectures, one of my first slides was there's 4 pillars of health, right? There's sleep, nutrition, exercise, and stress mitigation. And that's stress mitigation has all sorts of flavors. That can be something mindfulness, that could be meditation, that could be prayer, that could be community, right? Just like whatever it is that helps you lower and control your stress levels. So, I'd say maybe 5 or 6 years into that, I decided, the more of my own Kool-Aid I drank, the more research I did, I was like, I felt at the beginning when I first started lecturing on sleep, I felt like I was being a little hyperbolic, like just trying to push it to get it to sink in and land home and like be a little striking with the information. And then the more I learned, I was like, oh no, it's way more than that. Even it's way more important than that. Like it's so much more important than even I knew. And I was the guy trying to convince everybody how important it was. And about 5 or 6 years into it, I switched it and I said, there's 3 pillars of health. There's nutrition, there's exercise, and there's stress mitigation. And those 3 pillars sit on a foundation, and that foundation is sleep. And the reason I say that is because you can't get the benefit of any of those other things if you aren't sleeping, right? Like if you think about it, if you slept really well and you were really smart with your exercise planning and you're really good at controlling your stress, but your diet was maybe a little crappy, you'd still be in pretty good shape. You'd still be better off than most people, right? Now over a lifetime of that, you're going to have some problems that you shouldn't have had. And you can do that with any of those other pillars. But crappy sleep, nothing else matters, right? Because one thing, your ability to stick with your nutritional plan, right? And we know that I could design like whatever the ideal nutritional plan is for you. We know something as simple as that being a strain on you. If that is like emotionally hard for you, if you're weighing and measuring and you hate what you're eating, but you're doing it out, because it's the right thing and you're begrudgingly going through it, that stress, right? And that affects not only your ability to stick with it, but kind of the reason you're doing it, right? Like we're kind of doing this so that we have a better life, so that we're enjoying things, right? And like you're making yourself miserable and your plan is just to do that forever. So your appetite, like what you feel like eating, what you crave, what you want, and your ability to talk yourself out of eating something else, that's all what we call appetite regulation. Well, appetite regulation is set while you're sleeping. Okay. If you don't sleep well, your appetite regulation is off and you crave different things, and your willpower will be lower because your prefrontal cortex will be impaired because you didn't get enough sleep. Move on to exercise. As we know, when you lift, say if I want to get stronger, right? My goal is a bench press of whatever 100 pounds, whatever hundreds of pounds, that's my goal. And so I'm going to train with as close to that goal as I possibly can. And I'm going to progress up. And what I'm actually doing is damaging my muscles, right? And if I work out really hard, I actually completely rupture that muscle cell, right? It completely breaks open and that cell's dead and it's gone. So I'm damaging myself while I'm working out. When I sleep, my brain and body are using what I did today as a template for what my brain and body believes that it's going to need to do tomorrow. And it's going to come back in a way that's more fortified against what I did today. So the idea is if I damage my muscle tissues by causing them to exert more force than they're capable of exerting, going to that failure where I'm trying to contract my muscles and they're getting longer because I've failed, that muscle cell is going to repair in a way that makes it stronger and able to create more force. And that's how I'm going to get stronger. Well, that only happens while I'm asleep. And 99% of that happens in the first 4 hours of my sleep in what we call deep sleep. So if I'm interfering with my deep sleep, or if I'm getting inadequate sleep or low quality sleep, I'm not going to repair. So now if I go to the gym tomorrow, I didn't even repair from yesterday. Why am I going to go tomorrow? And then the next day and the next day. And now I'm just getting progressively weaker and I'm damaging myself more and more every day. So again, sleep's the most important part of getting your gains from your exercises. Now, controlling your stress hormones. You can control your stress hormones. You can do meditation. You can do box breathing. You can do prayer. You can do diurnal head, audio beats. You can do guided meditation. You can do breath walking. You can do all sorts of things, right? Tai Chi, flow, Kundalini yoga, all sorts of things that are meant to lower stress hormones. Just strict mindfulness training. However, what sets your baseline? So stress hormones get a bad rap, right? Everybody's like, oh, I don't want any stress hormones. Well, no stress hormones means you're dead, because stress hormones are critical for life. And what they do is they keep you alert in proportion to your environment. So if I've just woken up and I woke up without an alarm clock, my stress hormones are what woke me up, right? Because that's what wakes you up in the morning if an alarm clock's not waking you up, or if lights aren't waking you up, or something, if nothing external is waking you up. Why you wake up is because your stress hormones reach a certain level. They go down really low when you're asleep and then they progressively get higher. And at some point in the morning, they're high enough to wake you up. Now, if I get out of bed and I go lay on my couch and I read a book, well, I don't need very much stress hormones. My stress hormones are going to be pretty close to what I woke up with. Now, while I'm reading a book, if somebody crashes into my house, crashes their car into the front of my house, now my stress hormones are going to go through the roof, right? I'm going to go into fight or flight. I'm going to jump up, and my stress hormones are appropriate in proportion to my environment. So if I'm trying to control my stress hormones, I have to have a controlled level to begin with, right? I have to have a reasonable level to begin with. Or if I'm running with high stress hormones and I do some breath work, mindfulness training, meditation, whatever, and I bring them down to here, well, I'm still not even to where I should be if I wasn't stressed. Well, the number one thing that sets your stress hormones is your sleep. Because the whole point of me going to sleep tonight is to prepare myself for tomorrow, right? It's to repair from today and to prepare for tomorrow. And I'm going to use today as the template for what I need to be able to do tomorrow. Now, the contract you're born into, you're going to die. The day you're born, we know you're going to die. Guaranteed. The other thing that you're born into is that it takes approximately 8 hours to recover from being awake for approximately 16 hours. That's the way the world works. You can put butter in your coffee, wear whatever kind of glasses you want, do whatever you want to do any kind of hacks, but that's the contract. So if I go to sleep tonight and instead of sleeping 8 hours, I sleep 6 hours. I'll go super quick and we can go and I'll do more detail if you want me to. But super quickly, when you first go to sleep, you go primarily deep sleep. Deep sleep is restorative. It's repairing all the damage. It's flushing toxins out. It's replenishing nutrients that you've used. It's getting rid of waste products and it's putting in the nutrients and reserves into the places where they should go. And it's what's called anabolic inflammation. So it's like repairing the damaged muscle tissue from working out or whatever, or anything like that, right? So that's deep sleep. Second half of the day is primarily, or of the night is primarily REM sleep, and that's doing a whole lot of neurological stuff. So that's taking things from working memory into long-term memory. It's forming durable pathways so that you can access that information. It's forming pathways to other information that you know so that you can actually use that information, work with it, manipulate it, actually know it. It's emotionally categorizing things. So if you have a fight with your spouse about dirty dishes in the sink or something, that's a nothing burger, right? It's a nothing burger. So you shouldn't have any prolonged stress or emotional strife about that, right? That's something that should be gone in a few minutes. Well, if you don't sleep well, you don't emotionally categorize things, that thing can be out there lingering, and that can seem like something that's a harbinger for divorce, or this relationship's really going south because of that stupid thing out there. And that's a glib example, but that happens, right? That's truly what's happening with emotional categorization of events. And so there's a lot of neurological stuff going on in the second half of the night. So back to my original thing. If the whole point of me sleeping tonight is to repair from today and to prepare for tomorrow, and instead of sleeping 8 hours, I sleep 6, I've shorted myself 25%, right? Tomorrow's still going to come. The sun's going to come up at exactly the same time. How am I going to get through the day if I didn't repair? Right? If I didn't repair everything, if I didn't restore the nutrients and the reserves where they should be, how am I going to get through the day? I'm going to do it by releasing more stress hormones. Those stress hormones are going to get me through the day. Stress hormones are the fight or flight hormones, right? So the maximum stress hormones is fight or flight. So that's, if you get in a car crash, or you get in a fist fight, or you get in a gunfight, or, IRS comes to audit you, whatever, just gets you completely freaked out where you can't think kind of stress. That's fight or flight. Now, what happens is there's some great things that happen. Your pupils dilate, you take in a bigger field of vision, but you'll have tunnel vision because you're only focusing on the threat, right? But you'll take in more light. Your lungs, like the pulmonary trees, actually dilate. You use more of your lungs. Your heart rate goes up. Your blood pressure goes up. Your blood flow to your periphery, to your skin, actually goes away. Blood flow to your muscles and musculoskeletal system actually increases. The blood flow to your organs, like your apart from your heart, like all your internal organs, your digestion, your kidneys, your bowels, your liver, your spleen, your reproductive organs, all that blood flow is going to go away from those. You're going to be faster. You're going to be stronger. You're going to have more endurance. Your reflexes are going to be faster. Your pain threshold is going to be higher. Your skin, if it gets cut, is not going to bleed because the capillaries have all constricted out there. You're ready to fight or flee. So you're kind of superhuman. That's the best athlete you will ever be. And you're really impulsive, right? You don't think. Your prefrontal cortex, that part of our brain that makes us the smartest animal on the planet, that goes away because you don't want to think your way out of an emergency. You want to react out of emergency. Things are happening faster than thought. So you need to just react and be super impulsive. The reason we don't run around like that all the time is because that's actually catabolic. So catabolic means that you're taking big complex things and you're making small, simple things out of them. So an example I always use is catabolic let's start with anabolic. So anabolic, I eat macronutrients. I eat a bunch of amino acids. I eat protein. They break down into amino acids. Those amino acids then go to my cells and I can make cellular structures out of that. I can make a muscle cell out of that. So I can use amino acids to build a muscle. That's anabolic, right? And that's what we think about with anabolic steroids, like building muscle. Catabolic is the opposite. Catabolic is taking these complex things and breaking them down into simple things. So when I'm starving and I don't have enough amino acids to do all the cellular functions that my body needs to do to keep me alive, my body will actually use my muscle as a fuel source, and it'll break down my muscle and make amino acids out of it so that my cells can do the work they need to do to keep me alive. So stress hormones are catabolic. And the reason we don't run around in fight or flight all the time is because that's catabolic and you're breaking yourself down. You've seen the aging that happens in a president, right? Like the president, when they become a president 4 years later, you see them like they've aged 10 years in 4 years. That's catabolic activity, right? They're not getting any sleep and there's a ton of stress. So the reason I'm saying all that is if I need stress hormones to get through the day, I'm running around with higher stress hormones. Now my mindfulness training doesn't matter all that much because I'm using stress hormones. Now the other downside of having high stress hormones is that your stress hormones need to be at a certain level to allow you to go to sleep. So people who have high stress hormones have difficulty sleeping. When you have difficulty sleeping, you don't get enough sleep or you get poor quality of sleep. And then you have to rely on stress hormones more the next day. And now you can't sleep because you have high stress hormones, and you have high stress hormones because you're not sleeping well. And that just cycles on itself. And that's the beginning of the end.
Well, and that's the vicious cycle my wife is actually in right now, where she has trouble going to bed. So then she wakes up, tired, and, then obviously more stimulants to get through the day. Mm-hmm. But a question, as you were talking about, as you go through the night, different levels of sleep, you have your deep sleep and then neurological, I think you said. So like for somebody that goes to bed and they can fall asleep, but then let's say they wake up 3 or 4 hours into the night, does that tell you that it's like an emotional stressor or something that triggers that?
So there's two sort of programs running at the same time that dictate your ability to sleep and your desire to sleep. So if you've ever stayed up for, 48 hours in a row or something, and you've had that experience where you can literally fall asleep, like standing up, like you can close your eyes at a stoplight and fall asleep and start dreaming, right? You're dying to sleep. Like it's the most important thing in the world to you. And it's all you can do to not fall asleep. And that we call sleep pressure. And sleep pressure is largely driven by the buildup of a compound called adenosine. So every cell in our body uses the same fuel source to do whatever that cell does. A liver cell, a heart cell, a muscle cell, a kidney cell, a bone cell, it doesn't matter. They all use ATP as their energy source. And ATP is adenosine with 3 phosphate groups on it. So triphosphate. And every time you pull a phosphate off, it causes the release of energy. And then that energy is what your cell's using. So you can break ATP down into ADP, which is 2. That's di. And then you can break that down into AMP, which is mono, which is 1. And then you can break AMP down into just A and P. And that A is adenosine. So the longer you're awake and the more energy you're exerting, the more your cells are having, the more cellular respiration or the more cell activity that needs to go on, the more adenosine you're going to build up. And a buildup of adenosine in the brain is what causes sleep pressure.
Okay.
And all caffeine does is block adenosine receptors. It doesn't do anything about the adenosine. It just blocks the little, think of it as like a lock and a key. The lock is the adenosine receptor and the key is the adenosine. Well, caffeine just blocks the keyhole. So the adenosine is going to keep building up, but you're not going to feel as tired. So that's one thing that leads to going to sleep, right? The other thing that leads to going to sleep is just the circadian rhythm, right? So the being up for 18 hours and the diminution and resources that occur during those 16 hours that you're awake, so both of those things are involved. Now, in my experience, in my clinical experience, almost everybody who has difficulty sleeping, there are sleep disorders, and I want to separate myself from a sleep physician. A sleep physician is somebody who's who studies sleep diseases, right? Like metabolic, genetic disorders that are preventing you from being able to sleep. That's not what I do. I'm a performance guy, and I'm coaching people and like helping people understand. And I work with small things that can be interfering with your sleep, but I'm not treating a sleep disease. And the most common reason that people can't sleep is because of stress. Now, there's a nuance there, in that a man holds about 30 to 40% more muscle than a woman. If you take equal size frames, so to say. So if you take, let's say you take a smaller man, right? So you take a man who's 5'6" and 165 pounds. And then his wife is 5'4" and 120 pounds. Well, they have about the same size brain, right? Their heads are going to be about the same size, and the brain's going to be about the same size. It's the receptors and the volume of the brain, and then the volume of the receptors in the brain that's responding to the adenosine that's saying what the sleep pressure is. How bad do I want to go to sleep? How hard am I being driven to go to sleep? Well, if you have 40% more muscle mass, you're going to build up a lot more adenosine. So men usually have a lot of sleep pressure. Even when they're really stressed out, they fall asleep really easily because they have so much adenosine buildup. And once they go through their first sleep cycle of about 90 to 120 minutes, they flush out all that adenosine in their brain. They flush out a large portion of it. That's one of the things that happens during deep sleep, is the astrocytes that hold the structure of the brain, that cause the formation of the structure of the neurons and the way they're laid out. Those actually shrink, and they create little channels for the cerebral spinal fluid to go through and flush out these waste products. And by and large, that waste product is adenosine. And then, you're phosphorylizing the adenosine, and you're making adenosine into ATP again. So during that first sleep cycle, they get rid of a lot of their adenosine. Now, when you go to sleep, you're coming from awake, you're going down to stage 1, which is like pre-sleep, stage 2, transitional sleep, stage 3 and 4 is deep sleep. You're transitioning across time, and then you're crawling out of that stepwise again. You're going from 4 to 3 to 2, and then past 1 into REM. And so going from stage 2 to REM, you're actually going through the normal brain state of being awake. So if your stress hormones are high enough, you'll just wake up. Like when you go through that period of being awake, that's just going to wake you up. And now your stress hormones are high. And if you wake up and the first thing you start thinking about is what you're stressed about, then your stress hormones are going to get a lot higher right then, right? Because you can raise your stress hormones simply by your thoughts, just like you can decrease your stress hormones by your thought. And that's what mindfulness is. So men usually fall asleep really easily and then wake up after 1 sleep cycle, maybe 2 sleep cycles, and then they can't go back to sleep. Women, opposite problem. They don't have as much adenosine buildup, so they usually lay in bed and toss and turn and toss and turn and toss and turn and toss and turn. And then they finally fall asleep, and they stay asleep, but they didn't sleep for the first 2 or 3 hours they were in bed. So it ends up being about the same.
Okay. That's very interesting. So what are some practical steps? I know you offer the sleep remedy that I have used and I think is a fantastic product, but what are some steps that people can take, starting in the morning when they wake up to set their circadian rhythm to help them, throughout the day? Or what are things that can help them sleep for people that, that they discover how important sleep is, but they still struggle to do it? What are some steps that they can take?
So here's my formula for getting good sleep. The first step is imperative, right? You have to nail the first step. You have to perfect the first step. The first step is convincing yourself that you need sleep.
Because I do have those friends that say, I only need 3 or 4 hours and I'm good to go.
Right. So regardless of everything I've said today and how much it rings true with people, there's people listening to this that are going, oh yeah, absolutely. That's me. Oh, that makes so much sense. But at some level, they still don't think, well, that doesn't mean I need to sleep 8 hours, right? I get it, but I do fine with X, right? So The first step is to convince yourself that it's really important. And you have to know yourself. So this is why, this is one of the reasons why, my health program is a year, because there's a lot of psychology in the behavioral change around getting people to change their belief systems around sleep. So I offer a few ideas, and I'll let I'll let the listener figure out what they think motivates them. So one thing you can do is you can go into PubMed. Well, first I would say, give yourself 20 minutes, settle yourself down, be really quiet. Give yourself 20 minutes to figure out, say, what your 3 priorities are, like 3 most important things in your life, whatever it is. Being a great father, being a great spouse, my health, my profession, whatever it is. Like, I don't care what they are. It doesn't matter. List out your top 3 priorities. Like, these are the things that are the most important in the world to me. Now, go to PubMed or Google Scholar and put in sleep and that thing, right? Sleep and parenting, sleep and communication, sleep and connection, sleep and I don't care, whatever it is. And then just read yourself into panic, right? Because if you read the research, I can guarantee you all of your worst nightmares are exponentially more likely to become true when you're sleep deprived. When you don't get enough sleep, you are worse at everything. You're far less likely to achieve whatever goals you have in your life if you don't sleep well. So that's one way to do it. Another way to do it is to simply observe yourself and say, okay, well, I'm going to give myself a week, and I'm going to make sleep the most important thing in the world for me for 1 week. And then I'll see how I feel. And if I think it's all bogus at that point, then I'm going to throw it away and I'm going to do whatever I want to do. That's fair too. I've never had anyone do that, by the way. Every time they sleep for 3 days in a row and they're like, oh my God, what was I thinking? The world is, look at how bright all these colors are, man. Like, look at it. Everything's happier and better. And like, I feel like everything's better. So I've never had anybody do that, but maybe one of your listeners will be the first. So convince yourself that sleep is the most important thing for you. That's number 1. Number 2, I want to break sleep hygiene down into really simple steps. Everybody, you can go on Google and you can find 5 million different opinions on what sleep hygiene is, what your sleep routine should be. It's really simple. Up until about 150 years ago, we didn't have electricity. We didn't have lights at night. We got up roughly around the time the sun came up, and we started getting ready for sleep right around the sun going down. And on average, we would have fallen asleep 2 to 3 hours after the sun went down, and we'd wake up right around the time the sun coming up. So that's all you really have to reproduce. So the reason that happens is when the sun goes down, the blue light goes away. The blue light registers in some nerve cells in the back of your eye that have nothing to do with vision. All they do is sense blue light. When the blue light goes away, they fire some neurons that go into your brain. It goes through this pathway. It goes to the SCN, which is like the master clock. It tells it to do some things. One of the things it does is it fires off to the pineal gland to secrete melatonin. Melatonin is a hormone most people have heard of. Melatonin does not make you go to sleep. Melatonin initiates the processes that lead to you falling asleep. So your ancestors the sun would have gone down. There wouldn't have been any light. There would have been no blue light to cause, to stop this from happening. All of these changes would have happened. Melatonin would have started secreting, 15 minutes after the sun went down. And then 2 to 3 hours later, there would be enough neurochemical changes to make you feel sleepy, and you would go to sleep. Now, we're also a very visual animal. We see the world, like almost everything we describe as humans, we talk about through what it looks like, right? We're a highly visual animal, and we can't see at night. So our ancestors, when the sun went down, there wouldn't have been much to pay attention to because they couldn't see much, right? So you can stimulate your brain past feeling sleepy. So I can take all the blue light away, I could wear the blue blocking glasses, take all the blue light away, but then go to a nightclub with loud music and a bunch of attractive young women bouncing around and have a few drinks and joke around with my buddies. And I'm not going to feel sleepy because I'm stimulating my brain past that. Right.
Okay.
And then the other thing, if you think about it, before they had heating and air conditioning, the sun set the temperature, right? So when the sun went down, the temperature went down. When the temperature went down, your body temperature went down. So those are the three things that are sleep hygiene. Decrease the blue light, decrease the stimulation to your brain, and decrease your body temperature. That's sleep hygiene. However you want to do that is up to you. There's a million ways to skin that cat, as they say. So that's step 2. First step, convince yourself sleep is the most important thing in the world for you. Number 2, pay attention to sleep hygiene. And I'm not saying spend 3 hours getting ready for bed. Most people aren't going to do that, but do your best, right? Step 3, if you know that you have problems around stress, if you know that stress is keeping you awake, if you're laying in bed thinking about things that you need to do or should have done or, whatever, or if you're waking up and thinking about things that you should have done or wish you'd done or want to do or anything like that stress. On my website, there's a PDF. It would take me an hour to explain the whole thing, but there's a PDF that basically teaches you how to take stress out of your sleep environment. And it's just a few tricks. It's setting a couple of alarm clocks. It's making a couple of lists. It's making a couple of agreements with yourself. And it's a little bit of nutritional guidance of eating around bedtime. Do that if stress is an issue for you. If stress isn't an issue for you, set an alarm clock to start getting ready for bed. Ideally an hour, right? So an hour before you're going to go to bed, an alarm clock goes off. That has equal importance as the alarm clock that wakes you up to go to work. That alarm clock goes off. Computers go off, televisions go off, gaming systems go off, like whatever it is. You start getting ready for bed. You dim the lights, you put on your blue blocking glasses, whatever. You don't work on projects. If you're going to watch television, you don't watch the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. You watch things that are non-stimulating, mundane. Take a shower, take a bath, turn your air conditioner down, whatever, but get your body temperature a little bit lower. Again, no blue light, no stimulation, a little lower body temperature, and go to bed in about an hour. And then wake up when the alarm clock goes off in the morning. And even if you wake up before that, just stay in bed, meditate, do breath work, relax. If your alarm clock goes off 5 minutes later, you got 7 hours and 55 minutes of sleep and 5 minutes of meditation. If the alarm clock's not going to go off for 3 or 4 more hours, you'll fall back to sleep at some point. Okay. It doesn't matter when, just take the stress out of it. And yeah, that's it. That's really it. Obviously, I have my sleep supplement, but again, my sleep supplement, I think of it as a true supplement. I think of supplements as supplemental, right? It's, so there's the ideal way to live your life, right? And the ideal way to live your life was the way you evolved. Okay, well, we're not going to do that, right? We're not going to get rid of electricity. We're not going to, go back to exactly how our ancestors were. So you're not going to quite meet the ideal. There's going to be complications in your life, things you have to do, whatever. There are limitations to what you can do to approximate your ancestral behavior. In between those two, we supplement nutritionally, or we use gadgets to, help like, diurnal beats or something to help you slow your brainwaves down. That would be a supplement in there, right? My sleep supplement would be a supplement in there. Whatever, ice baths, saunas, any of those things I would consider supplemental. Like you're trying to get closer to the ideal, but you're never going to hit the ideal. Very unlikely.
Do you have any opinion on like wearables such as like an Oura Ring or Whoop, or, like people track it with an Apple Watch?
Yeah. My advice on those is that if you like that type of data, then it's beneficial, but only use it as a way to track. Don't use it as a way to grade yourself. Okay. The reason being is because those are all running off of algorithms. And, just like there's some basic tenets of nutrition and there's some basic tenets of exercise that are true for everybody, right? Your ideal diet and my ideal diet aren't the same thing. Like your ideal exercise routine and mine aren't the same thing. So if we ran it all off of an algorithm, it would say we should be the same.
Okay.
And we're not. And so sleep's the same way. It's like there's an algorithm that's close. It's in the ballpark, right? So it's like if your Oura Ring is giving you a sleep score of 80, but you feel fantastic, and when you get 100, you get a 96 rating, you don't feel as good as the 80. Build your life around getting the 80, right? But again, don't use that for the grading. You're just using it to track. So like, how much sleep did I get, right? Like how many sleep interruptions did I have, and what was my total time in bed, I think is the most useful in there. I think it's up in the air how accurate they are as far as the sleep staging. They are fairly accurate, and they could provide some guidance if there were sleep disorder. But if you're like your deep sleep and your deep sleep and REM sleep ratios aren't going to be the same every night, because it depends on what you did with your body, right? And it depends on your state. You're like, what did you do today? What have you done for the last several days? What's your nutritional status like? Are you fighting off a cold? Are you fighting off some kind of virus or something? Are you a little more? So it's not going to be the same every night. So I hesitate to tell people to use it as a grading system. Just use it as a way to collect data. Okay. And if you don't like gadgets, you don't need them, right? So I have like some older clients who they're not going to wear any kind of wearables. They don't even know how to turn on a computer. They don't care about any of that crap. They just journal. They have a notebook next to their bed. They write down what time they go to sleep. They write down what time they wake up. They write down any comments. If I had to get up to go to the bathroom 5 times last night, they write that down. If they feel like they had a lot of dreams last night, I had a lot of really crazy dreams, write that down. Woke up hot and sweaty a few times, write that down. Don't remember anything, felt like I sleep great, write that down. And then go about your day. And then before you go to bed that night, how did you feel today? How'd your day go? Today was a great day. I felt like I had a lot of energy, or I had like a huge energy slump from after 3 o'clock. I've been wanting to go to sleep the whole day. That's enough, right? All we're looking for is patterns, like some way to measure it. And then you start analyzing, okay, on the days that I felt really good, my score looks like this, or my journal looks like this. And what did I do to get to that? Let me try to break that code down, figure out what I did to get to there. And then let's get as many of those days as I can. And then, the other thing is to treat it like anything else. Like a lot of days I go to the gym and I'm just getting through it. It's like doing the workout, doing what I need to do, getting through it, go home, feel a little better. I feel better than if I wouldn't have gone, but wasn't a great workout. Wasn't really happy with it. Not super enthused that I did it, but did it. Sleeps that way sometimes, right? Not every night's great. Don't try to be a highlight reel.
And one last thing before I let you go that we haven't even touched on, but I think has come out over the last year and a half, is the effect of sleep and our immunity, or just our overall health. The first thing I'll notice, like if I'm traveling for work or doing whatever, and all of a sudden my sleep isn't as good, my nutrition isn't as good, all of a sudden I'll end up with a little cough, or just start to feel run down, and inevitably if I can get home, get back on my routine and get that sleep back in check, I rarely ever get sick.
Right. Yeah. So again, the immune system, something I say all the time, and it's not really popular amongst my colleagues, but nobody's ever proven to me that it's wrong. They just don't like to hear it. The body doesn't have any systems, right? We break the body up into systems as a way to understand it and to learn it, right? And to make predictions and diagnoses and so forth. But everything matters. Everything matters to everything. If somebody comes to me and they say they have low testosterone, well, you don't just have low testosterone, right? You have a hormonal imbalance, and you probably have about 8 to 10 hormones that are out of balance. And the one that you're focusing on is testosterone. So everything is like that. So our immune system is everything, right? our nutritional status affects our immune system. Our hormones affect everything all the time. And every hormone affects almost every other hormone. So when I was saying earlier, when I was talking about the fight or flight and all this great stuff that happens, where we become superhuman and we're faster and stronger and faster reflexes and braver and quicker and all this stuff, like we're much better versions of ourselves. But there's a lot of stuff that's not happening at all because it doesn't matter. Right. So we're no longer digesting, because if the tiger gets you, it doesn't matter if you digest your food. If you have a parasitic infection, you're not fighting off that parasitic infection. Doesn't matter. Right. Yeah. Tiger gets you, parasite doesn't matter. If you have, say, like a sprained ankle or a virus, a flu, a bacterial infection, any of that stuff that needs to be repaired or fought off, like the system that repairs your damaged tissues is the same system that fights off infections and parasites. So that's all the same thing. So that's, again, anabolic and catabolic. You can have catabolic inflammation, like when you injure your knee, right? And your knee's swollen and it's sore and it's red and it's spongy with fluid. That's a catabolic inflammation. You can also have an anabolic inflammation where you've worked out and your muscles feel sore and you're carrying a little more fluid, but you don't have that red, spongy achiness because you didn't damage that tissue. It's not catabolic. They're not clearing out waste. It's just repairing. So that's an anabolic inflammation. Well, your immune system is essentially the same way. So your immune system can be doing really positive things or it can be doing really negative things. But again, all of that is set by stress hormones. So when I'm in fight or flight, my immune system isn't working because my immune system doesn't matter. The exact opposite of fight or flight is deep sleep. So when I'm in deep sleep, I have the lowest level of stress hormones I will ever have during a 24-hour period. When I have the lowest level of stress hormones, everything from fight or flight is reversed, right? I'm not using my eyes. I'm not taking big breaths. My heart rate's low. My blood pressure is low. Right? My blood glucose is low. Like everything about me is exactly the opposite of fight or flight. I'm not using my body essentially. So where's all the energy going? Well, it's going to my liver and it's going to my kidneys and it's going to my GI tract and it's going to my reproductive organs and it's going to my brain, because my brain, if you remember, that's impaired during fight or flight as well. So all of that is the immune system, right? So the immune system it's part of all that system that's accelerated during deep sleep. The reason you feel tired and achy when you have a viral infection isn't because of the virus. There's nothing about a virus that makes you feel tired or achy. It's your immune system's response to that makes you feel achy, right? You're using all of your energy. Like your immune system is ramping up. It's producing way more cells. It's producing a ton of chemical messengers. It's really active and it's taking away energy from every other resource in your body because it needs to fight off this infection, because that's the most likely thing that's going to kill you. So when you're in deep sleep, you have almost no stress hormone. You have the maximum immune function. And again, that immune system function is repairing the damaged muscle tissue, but it's also fighting off the bacteria and the parasites and the viruses. So it's all the same thing. And that's actually an anabolic activity. So you're doing things that are making yourself better and stronger and more resilient. So when you, like I just told you, that when you're in fight or flight, your immune system essentially doesn't exist, right? It doesn't matter because it doesn't matter. Well, if you're at halfway to fight or flight, just because you're running around with high stress hormones all the time, and you're running around with high stress hormones because you're highly stressed or because you're not getting enough sleep, no difference, right? You run into the same level of stress hormones, then your immune system is probably halfway impaired. It's definitely demuted. Like I'm not sure it's linear, but it's, if you have half the stress hormones, you're definitely impairing your immune system. And the other important thing to recognize is that the only animal on this planet that chooses to deprive itself of sleep are humans. Every other animal on the planet, the only time they will deprive themselves of sleep is if they're starving to death, like they're in a famine, or they're being preyed upon, right? It stands to reason that programming is in us also, right? Because if you think about it, before rural electrification, before the industrialization of the world, there was no benefit to depriving yourself of sleep. What would be the point, right? So we, as a species, and research suggests this is true, but I don't know that there's a clever way to prove it. But research suggests that this is true. We, as a species, perceive ourselves as starving or being preyed upon if we're not getting enough sleep, and so it changes our physiology. So it's moving us closer to fight or flight, and it's making us more anxious. And anything that's raising stress hormones is impairing your immune system. Now, the damnable thing about that is now I'm sitting here telling you that if you're stressed out, you're going to have a poor immune system, and everybody's worried about this phantom virus that's going to kill everybody. So now they're stressed that they're going to be stressed, and they're so you have to do whatever mental gymnastics you need to do to get past that. But that's the reality of it.
Well, this has been absolutely awesome. I could sit and listen to you talk all day about this. Just
don't tempt me.
And one quick question, and you brought up like testosterone levels a couple different times. And from the way I understand it is, like, as a society, that level of acceptance of what is normal has come down over the last 20, 30, 40 years or whatever. So I've heard a lot of people talk about, just because you're like in the normal acceptance range by what your regular doctor says, you are definitely not at optimal levels.
Right.
Is that?
Yeah. So it's just like when I was explaining to you when I started, when I was in the SEAL teams and they started, confessing their problems to me, and I didn't know what to do because I didn't have any training on it. And it took me a long time to figure it out.
Yeah.
Well, most doctors don't know much about hormone optimization, right? If you're going to see your general practitioner, and even an endocrinologist, like an endocrinologist deals with hormones, but they're looking for hormone disease. And, the way the medical system works is we have these reference ranges. Some people call them normal ranges. And I think, unfortunately, some physicians look at them as normal ranges. So if you're within these boundaries, you're normal. Well, here's how those things are established, right? So you've probably heard of the Framingham studies.
Yes.
Okay. So the Framingham was just a place in Massachusetts, a small town. It had a reasonable sized population, and not many people moved in and not many people moved out. It was a pretty stable community. And so they said, well, let's just go study this community. And we're just going to collect a bunch of data. And every time we come up with a new test, we're going to use it on this community, and we're going to try to figure out what baselines are, what normal is, right? What usual is, the reference ranges. And so when it came time to do testosterone, when you started testing serum levels of testosterone, they said, okay, there's going to be a few criteria to begin this. So one, you have to be a male, right? You have to have testicles. You have to be 19 or older, and you have to be alive, essentially. And if you fit those three criteria, when they do the studies, you were part of the normal range. So that's why the normal range, the reference range is that normal, what they consider normal, became the reference range. And that went from 250 to 1100. What the hell does that tell you? I mean, that's a really, really big range. So what does 600 say? You're in that range. Well, what it means is that you're in the range of somebody with testicles who's between 19 and 85 years old and still alive. Well, that doesn't tell me anything, right? So obviously, the most obvious thing, like logic would dictate, and if you've done any clinical work, that it would be supported by the logic that the 85-year-old in the nursing home, who the most athletic thing he did every day was push the remote control buttons. He was 250 probably, right? And the 19-year-old was 1100. So that was one of my frustrations when I was working with the SEALs. When I did those big panels on them, I did all of these hormones. And again, I was a doctor. I wanted to improve their hormones, but they weren't outside of the normal range. They were, I'd have a 30-year-old guy sitting in my office, who's an active duty Navy SEAL, and he's big and he's muscular and he's cut and he's ripped and he has a really hard, really physical job. And his total testosterone is 252, which is inside the normal range. And I send him over to endocrinology and say, hey, this guy's testosterone's low. And they're like, no, it's within the normal range. Like, what do you mean it's low? Like, well, I don't think I don't think that's true, right? So what I do, like when I'm working with people's hormones, I say, okay, when do people look, feel, and perform their best? 25 men, 25 to 30ish, right? That's kind of like our peak. So why wouldn't you want those kind of hormone levels, right? So I go for that, right? Like I'm not going for the reference range. Now, the other thing is that the reference range has changed. The way they do labs now is like every 10,000 labs or something. So like Quest, they'll run 10,000 total testosterone serum levels. And then out of that 10,000, they'll create a new reference range. And then every 10,000, they redo it. And they keep redoing it. And they keep adjusting the reference range. And that's to keep up with environmental changes. But environmental changes are detrimental, right? So we have pseudotoxin, or we have pseudo-neoestrogens now, right? So like the BPA from the plastic bottle, that acts like estrogen. When you get a new car, that new car smell, that's estrogen, right? Like that's the plastic of the carpet and the plastic of the dash and all that. Like that's estrogen. Those act like estrogen. The hormones they're giving to the cattle, estrogen. Like a lot of the chemicals they put in food act like estrogen. And the total testosterone, as it turns out, doesn't matter that much because what matters is what's bioavailable. And if you look at the Framingham data and you go back and you age stratify it, you can say, well, the average, say 25 to 30-year-old had a testosterone and probably somewhere in the 800 to 900 range. And they wouldn't have had many neo pseudoestrogens, so they wouldn't have had very high sex hormone binding globulin. So most of their testosterone would have been unbound, would have been free, and they would have had, about 3% of their total testosterone free. So if they had a 900, that would be a free testosterone of 27, right? Well, when you start introducing these estrogen-like chemicals and even estrogen itself, because our body fat, men's body fat, like a subcutaneous fat that we see that, like when we look in the mirror, the fat we don't like, that fat, that has aromatase in it. It has an enzyme that converts testosterone to estrogen. So the fatter you get, the more of your testosterone becomes estrogen. And sadly, your brain monitors your testosterone levels through your estrogen levels. So if you have a lot of estrogen, your brain's like, oh, we must have a lot of testosterone. And then it decreases the luteinizing hormone. And then your testicles produce less testosterone. And then you get fatter and more of it gets converted. And so that's another, self-propagating downward spiral. But if you look at the Framingham data and say, okay, 900 was, say, average for a 25-year-old, free would have been 27. Estradiol would have been around 10 to 15. Sex hormone binding globulin would have been 10 to 15. Well, now I can have a 25-year-old who has a total testosterone of 252. He can have an estradiol of up to 50. He can have a free percentage of 1%. And he can have a sex hormone binding globulin of 100. And it's all considered normal now. That guy essentially doesn't have any testosterone. He has 1% free out of 250, which means that he has a 2.5, right? The guy I talked to you who was average in 1950 when they did the reference range, he had a free of 27. This guy has a 2.5, and they're the same age, right? So it's a lot more complex than just looking at numbers, the basic numbers of total. And like I said, there are no systems. Every hormone impacts every other hormone. So you have to know that. You have to think through that. And it takes somebody who thinks through all of that and somebody who has a lot of education, a lot of training to think through all of that. And it's not that common. It really isn't. I mean, a lot of these strip mall testosterone places, they just give you testosterone. And there's so many fallacies in the way they do that. There's so many problems in it. And I get that all the time, because, like I said, most of my private clients are wealthy and they've already gone to see the testosterone doctor, right? And they felt great for 3 months and then kind of went away and they didn't feel that great anymore. And they're not really sure why. And I know why. because I didn't take a weekend course. I've been studying this for, 15 years. So one single night, and something we didn't get into also was the alcohol metaphor. I never completed that thought. So let me do these two things really quickly. So one single night of short sleep. So short sleep is defined as 2 hours less than you need. So if you need 8 hours, you get 6. One single night of short sleep decreases total testosterone by 30%, decreases insulin sensitivity in a couple of tissues by 30%, decreases growth hormone by about 30%, increases inflammation by about 30%, your HSCRP, increases oxidation by about 30%. So everything bad goes up about 30%, everything good goes down by about 30%. And that's in one single night. Now you string a bunch of those nights together and you can see what kind of a program you're running into. And when you talked about the alcohol thing, if you're awake for 24 hours, you perform as though you have a blood alcohol level of about 0.08 or 0.1. So that's like that illegal limit, like where you shouldn't be operating equipment. We know you're impaired. You're impaired enough to where you shouldn't be driving a car. Then the argument, of course, is, well, I don't stay up for 24 hours. Well, all right, short sleep, miss 2 hours a night. So sleep 6 instead of 8 hours, 11 nights in a row, and you perform exactly as though you have been slept for 24 hours. Do that for 22 nights in a row, and you perform exactly as though you haven't slept for 48 hours. And if you've ever been awake for 48 hours, you're a shit show. Like, you are not good at anything. You shouldn't be making any decisions. You shouldn't be doing anything of any importance if you've been up for 48 hours. And that's how people run around. And the reason, as I was saying earlier, the reason my job is so hard is because when people sleep well, they don't remember their sleep. And when people don't sleep well, they wake up with a little extra stress hormone. And that little extra stress hormone actually makes them feel pretty good. And they feel like they're doing okay. So again, it's just like alcohol. When you have one drink, if you have one drink, well, I probably shouldn't go jump on my car right away. I'm going to wait around an hour before I drive home or something. And then you have two drinks. You're like, okay, well, I got to really be careful now. And I'm going to wait at least a couple of hours, no more drinks, drink water. And then I'm going to go home. By the time you've had 4 drinks, like, I can drive, no problem, because like your self-awareness diminishes. Well, the same thing happens with sleep. So when we sleep adapt people, meaning we give people 14 hours a day to sleep, and that's their only job. And like, you take it really seriously, and they can't even leave the room. Like, all they can do is lay in bed and stare at the ceiling or sleep. The average person will sleep 12 and a half hours when you first start that. And over the course of about 2 to 3 months, they'll eventually get down to about 8 hours of sleep. And we call that sleep adapted. And then no matter how long you keep going, they're only going to sleep 8 hours, and they're going to lay in bed and stare at the ceiling for 6 hours a day, because they're not sleepy anymore. They've completely adapted. And now you can take those people and you can test them on anything. Teach them a new skill and test them, or just test them on something they already know, or test them on some sort of performance, strength, athleticism, endurance, whatever. You can test them and call that their baseline. And then the next night, you only let them sleep 6 hours instead of 8. And then you test them again the next morning, and they'll do worse. No matter what you're testing them on, they'll do worse.
Just after one night of them.
Yeah, one night of short sleep. And then you ask them, how do you think you did? And they'll say, I didn't do as well. I was tired. I was sleepy. I didn't get enough sleep. Day 2, same thing. Day 3, probably the same thing. But by day 4, almost 100% of people will say, I think I did as well as I've ever done. I'm completely adapted to this. I feel fine. I feel like I've completely caught up to this, and I only need 6 hours of sleep now. I'm good. And then they would show them the data and like, look, you're still getting worse. Like it says right here, like, curve's still going down. They'll argue with the researchers and say, no, you collected the data wrong. Like, I know I did as well as and so again, it's just like being drunk, right? When somebody's drunk, they'll swear to you they're not drunk. Like, I'm not impaired. What are you kidding me? I'm fine. So that's the battle we're up against with that.
And is there any case? So like, let's say you sleep 6 hours one night. Can you sleep 10 the next night to make that up, or doesn't it work that way?
It does sort of work that way. So you can't. So I always tell people it's like an injury. So if I break my leg and I immediately get medical care, I go to a doctor, they use fluoroscopy, they set it, they put a splint on it, they give me all the right anti-inflammatories, I go through rehab, I do everything perfectly. I'm going to come back from that injury pretty quickly, as quickly as possible. And I'm going to have the minimum sequelae of it, right? But 5 years later, you can x-ray my leg and you'll still be able to tell that I broke it.
Okay.
Right. It may not cause me any noticeable difference. Right. Like I might be like, I can't tell. I can do everything I could always do. I feel totally fine. But there's some sequelae. So when you stay up too long, you're building up toxins in your brain, and those toxins are causing inflammation, and that inflammation can lead to these proteins, to beta amyloid proteins and tau proteins. And those are markers for neurological decline when you get older and certain neurological diseases. And so you're building up some of those, like you're going to have a little scar, right? That protein, you can think of that protein as like a neurological scar from having too many toxins for too long of a time. Now, it may be infinitesimally small, right? I mean, if you sleep 8 hours every night and you sleep 6 hours one night, I mean, yeah, is there some change? Yeah, but is that going to be noticeable? Almost certainly not. That's not going to be a big deal. But when you do it over a sustained period of time, like, yeah, you're going to have some scar tissue in there. Now, you can pay it back. And the sooner you pay it back, the better, right? It's like credit card debt. The longer you have the debt, the more expensive it is, right? Don't pay it back slowly. Like, get as much sleep as you possibly can as soon as you can. Get sleep adapted again. And again, that's like the broken leg metaphor, right? The opposite side is like, I break my leg and I'm like, well, I'm busy. I'm going to do some other stuff. And maybe in a few days, I'll go see the doctor. And then he tells me to use crutches, but I don't really want to use crutches because it interferes with it. And I don't really take it that seriously. I'm going to have a lot more sequelae. So it's the same thing. If I sleep deprive myself, I go, oh, I damaged myself. I'm going to catch up right away. Or I damaged myself. I'm going to try to catch up this weekend. I didn't work this weekend. I'm going to try to get like an extra hour of sleep every night or something and you're just not going to have as good of an outcome.
I was going to say, like, from a practical standpoint too, how many of us are going to be able to find time to get 10 hours of sleep?
Right. I mean, that's the thing. The biggest problem with what I do is that, society has set itself up to value sleep to a certain degree and to essentially give people a certain amount of sleep. And people have to make a lot of people have to make some really substantial life changes to get enough sleep. And a lot of people aren't willing to do it. They don't, they're either afraid that it's going to be too expensive in one area or another, or, they've boxed themselves into a corner with so many, compulsory things in their lives, things that they've set themselves up to where they're obligated and they have to do, and there's just not enough time in their day to get enough sleep. And they have to disappoint some people or quit something or, change jobs or, I mean, the worst thing is shift work. I lecture a lot of shift workers, law enforcement, first responders, ER physicians, a lot. I lecture a lot of shift workers, and at the end of the lecture, they come up to me and they talk to me, and every single lecture, somebody wants me to tell them that 2 + 2 doesn't equal 4. Like, how can 2 + 2 not be 4? And I'm like, it's always 4. Like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, shift work is very unhealthy, and you can't stop that. You can do some mitigation, like you can make it less damaging, but it's always going to be damaging.
Well, and that's where, for me, like, when I read your book, that's when it finally kind of clicked that I had to make changes and make it a priority. That maybe staying up watching TV till 11 or answering emails till midnight wasn't as critical as I thought it was. So, well, this has been awesome. Go ahead.
Here's a good one. I get the television show thing a lot, right? Everybody's addicted to entertainment, or some people, video games or whatever it is. You can use it with anything. It usually comes up as a television show, and I say, they'll try to sell me on it, because I get to be good friends with these people. I'm coaching them for a year, so I get to be good friends, and they're telling me how great this show is, and they're really selling me on the idea that they need to stay up just every now and then, just like stay up for one more show. And I always tell them, I say, that sounds fantastic. That sounds like a great show, and I absolutely think you should watch that extra episode. I think you're right. However, it's more important that you go to sleep. So just set your alarm clock an hour early and get up and watch that episode before you go to work.
How does that work out for them?
It's not that important anymore. No one does it. Everybody's like, well, I don't know. Is that important? But these are just mental games we play with ourselves, right? I mean, we just,
And I've never heard it phrased that way, but yeah, if you think about it in those terms, it's amazing how many how many people would watch less TV shows or do less binge watching.
Right. Or even the emails, right? It's like, well, I'm just going to respond to these 3 emails. Like, oh no, just go to sleep and then get up an hour early and do those 3 emails before you go to work.
Yeah.
Nobody will do it. And I'm like, well, I can do it during work. All right. Well, you can do it during work. All right. We settled that, didn't we? Yeah.
Yes. Well, thank you again. This has been phenomenal. Where's the best place for people to stay up to date with all the research and everything you're doing, both your website and your Instagram page?
So my Instagram is my name. It's at Kirk Parsley, Kirk, and then Parsley like the herb, Parsley, all one word, no underscores or spaces or anything. And then my website is doc, like short for doctor. So it's Doc Parsley, all is one word, DocParsley.com. And on my website, there's lots of podcasts and videos, lectures, TED Talks, media appearances. Then you can get my book. I think you get a PDF version of my book out there. There's ebooks. There's like PDFs. Like I said, that one PDF to help you get rid of stress around sleep. That's on there. There's one for child to help you build a sleep routine for your child and for kids. Blogs, interesting articles that I post, things like that.
Well, thank you. And like I said, this has been phenomenal. I could talk to you all day because I'm so intrigued by this. And I just know how getting enough sleep has completely changed the way I go about my day. You know, everything from cognitive function to feeling better in the gym to being able, like you mentioned earlier, even being able to stick to a nutrition plan easier. All those things, like you said, it's the foundation for everything else. And I can attest to that. So,
yeah, I mean, the prefrontal cortex, that's our simulator. That's the region of our brain that allows us to make, like the executive functioning, they call it, right? So you think of anything that an executive would do, but, it allows us to, to look at whatever tempts you, that pancakes for breakfast and go, well, if I do that, I know I'll feel like this. I really want this goal in the future. I know that's, antithetical to my goal. I don't want to. So I'm like, and I'm going to use my willpower to get past it. Well, that decision, like just having the wherewithal to have that dialogue in your head, that requires a prefrontal cortex, right? And then the willpower to move past that, to make that decision and stick with it, that requires the prefrontal cortex. The region of your brain that's the most impaired by stress hormones, prefrontal cortex. Your appetite regulation, like whether or not you feel full, whether or not you feel hungry, whether or not you feel like you're starving, that's set while you're asleep. Fuel partitioning is by and large dictated by the hormone releases while you're asleep. So when you eat the same meal, what your body does with every sort of macronutrient from that meal, that partitioning can be different based on your hormonal milieu, like how well you slept. So if you didn't sleep well, you won't digest the same. You won't partition your fuel the same. You won't use that the same way. So, I mean, there's nothing more important. I mean, and it's the worst sales pitch in the world because I'm like, it does everything. like sleep improves everything. Like anything you care about is improved, and anything that you care about is made worse by not getting adequate sleep.
Well, if that's not a good sales pitch to get more sleep, though, I don't know what is.
Yeah.
So thank you very much again. I thoroughly appreciate it and enjoyed it. And thank you guys for listening. If you have any questions or suggestions, please let us know at podcast@volkortson.com. Thank you.